title, AudioEye Webinar Series. Alrighty, everyone, we are at time. It is time for us to get started. So welcome if you are just joining us. Welcome to the Unlocking an Inclusive Workplace in 2024. It is November and we are preparing for 2024 to have our most accessible and inclusive year yet. So this webinar is going to be all about how you can build, retain, and promote inclusion in HR for your enterprise. My name is Mariela Paulino, and I am going to do a very quick intro. But before I do that, I want to let you know that we will also be welcomed by the amazing fellow AudioEye team. We are going to have Brittani Morelli, who is our Vice President of Human Resources. And we also have not one, but two members of the AudioEye Alliance team, individuals who are digital accessibility consultants. We are going to be joined today by Basad Baloud and April Combs. I hope you are as excited as I am on this beautiful Wednesday morning. So let's go ahead and get started. I need to go ahead and introduce myself as your host. So my role is I am the Senior Disability Advocacy and Social Media Manager here at AudioEye. I am currently located in Connecticut. My audio description, I am a Hispanic woman. I have long black hair in braids. I am wearing a black t-shirt that has the AudioEye logo on the left-hand side. And my background, as is the background of every speaker, is this blue gradient background that has the AudioEye logo on the right-hand side. My preferred gender pronouns are she and hers, and my disability is I am someone with a hearing disability, so I am depending on the closed captioning to follow along. Let's go into the agenda. So we're going to do a very quick welcome, which we just did, and then we are going to go into the digital accessibility and the employment lifecycle with Brittani. After that, you will have the opportunity to ask Brittani some questions. Then we will go right into our community insights with our Alliance community members. You will also have the opportunity to ask them some questions, some of your burning questions. And then finally, we will close with some closing remarks. I am so excited to welcome to the stage Brittani Morelli, who is our Vice President of Human Resources and will be walking us through the accessibility employment lifecycle. Brittani, are you ready?
Of course.
Fabulous. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mariela. As she mentioned, I'm Brittani Morelli, the VP of HR at AudioEye. I've been with the company about 3 years and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a white female. I have blonde hair. I'm wearing a red shirt at my home office, and my preferred pronouns are she, hers, and her. And I'm really excited to talk with all of you about accessibility and digital accessibility through varying stages of the employment lifecycle. Prior to getting to AudioEye 3 years ago, my exposure and understanding of digital accessibility was limited. I came from other industries and I didn't have any personal experience with assistive technology. So I've gotten to learn a lot over the last 3 years from our team of experts and allies here at AudioEye. It's been an informative, humbling experience to learn alongside our team, and I'm so thankful for their candid feedback and patience throughout this journey. There are a lot of great resources out there on accessibility maturity models. So this presentation is going to be geared towards my digital accessibility journey here with AudioEye and how we incorporated different aspects of digital accessibility into our internal practices to foster a more inclusive workplace. A lot of times when you hear about inclusion, disability isn't always included in that. So it's important to make sure that your environment's digitally accessible. And one thing in the next slide that we like to preach here at AudioEye, both to our team members and our customers, is that digital accessibility is a journey. It's not something that you do once. It's not something that you learn once. It's an ongoing iterative process. And we all come into this space with varying degrees of knowledge and experience, and that's okay. Everybody's on their own journey. And what matters is that we're all committed to the practice of being inclusive and to making progress along the way. We are going to talk about quite a few different things. We're going to talk about recruiting, onboarding, remote work, the accommodation process, training, hosting accessible meetings, and tooling. So we'll kick things off with recruiting. Accessibility and inclusion start before someone joins your company. So having an inclusive hiring process is what ensures that you can get representation at your organization. If there are barriers to applications for people with disabilities, you'll be less likely to hire them. So one thing that's really important here is standardizing your hiring process. So you want to be really intentional when you are discussing the success criteria for each role. You really want to understand what you're looking for so you can design a grading framework that prioritizes those things. And by having that standardized process, by having that rubric really established, you're going to be measuring to objective criteria, which is going to limit the amount of bias in your judgments and assessments of candidates. Another thing that can limit bias is completing unconscious bias training. That's a big one. So making sure that everybody who participates in the hiring process is aware of their own biases and has tools around how to reduce them in the hiring process. Another thing that you can do is prioritize representation in your recruitment funnel. So set goals for, and this goes for all underrepresented groups, but set goals at each stage of the hiring process, at each stage of your hiring funnel to ensure that you are meeting those representation goals, which will result in more diverse hires down the road. One thing that is really important in recruiting is having an accessible recruiting tool. And this actually, there's a lot of AI being incorporated into hiring tools, and AI hiring technology is inherently inaccessible. It's also not tested on a lot of data sets with people with disabilities information, so that can get filtered out really easily. So make sure that whatever tool you're using, you're aware of what data is getting filtered out, and make sure that the candidates are having an accessible experience when going through the hiring process. Another thing that we started to do here was having multiple formats to complete like knowledge tests. So specifically engineering, typically there's a coding test involved, but what we learned is, not everybody learns the same way, not everybody tests the same way. So we developed multiple ways for people to complete these tests, and just trying to cater to different preferences. And lastly, flexibility is key. So not only do we have flexibility in our types of tests, but we also have a way for candidates to reach out and let us know about any accommodations they're needing or any accessibility issues that they're needing throughout the recruitment process. So they know that, even if they do come across issues, we're wanting to partner with them and find solutions that will work for everybody. So the key takeaway here with recruiting is to standardize your process to reduce bias, but remain flexible in your approach. All right, so next up we have onboarding, which is that really critical first 3 months that someone joins your organization. And you'll see another consistent theme here is standardization. So there's a lot of ways that you can standardize your onboarding process, but I think it starts with building training. So again, understanding what's really critical for your new hires to learn. It can be general about the organization, but also in their specific role, and then build out trainings for those things. Again, having multiple ways to share that information. So it can be written documentation, videos, live presentations. Again, that theme, not everyone learns in the same way. One thing that we started asking candidates on a survey before they join the organization is we ask them what their learning style is. So that information is then shared with their hiring manager so that their hiring manager can adjust their style accordingly. Another way that you can also standardize the onboarding process is to really clearly outline expectations, right? So we have job descriptions. We also take that a step further and create training plans. So we give people really concrete understanding of what is expected at different phases of the onboarding process. So they can get a really clear picture of what the first 3 months looks like for them. And once you have all of that documented, once you have all of your training put together, you can't forget to check in with your new hires and your team. So we check in multiple different ways. We have check-ins with HR every month or so, as well as we have anonymous surveys to gauge feedback at different parts of the process. Another thing here that's important, but making sure that all of your onboarding information is stored in an accessible space. So using a tool that's accessible so it can be easily accessed and utilized by your new hires. If you're using tools for check-in, like a survey, for example, make sure that your survey tool is accessible. Not all of them are. So if you're using one that's inherently inaccessible, you're not going to get that critical feedback back from your new hires. Another thing, there's a lot of documentation as part of the onboarding process. So think about your handbook, your benefits guide, any policy documents that you're sending out. It's important to remember that PDFs and documents can also be inaccessible. So luckily, we have our PDF remediation team here at AudioEye that helps make sure all of our documentation is in an accessible format, meets the guidelines there. That's also a service that we offer to our customers as well. So key takeaway here with onboarding is to be intentional and accessible with your onboarding content. All right, moving on, we have remote work. So remote work, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, has made work more inclusive, and especially for people with disabilities. So according to the Department of Labor in 2022, the rate of employment for people with disabilities increased 3.4%. And that was to its highest level yet at 21.3%. And it's believed that remote work played a pretty big role in that. So prioritizing remote work wherever you can is really important. Our workforce is roughly 80 or so percent fully remote. And then once you have a remote team, and especially if you have in-person teams as well, you want to be really intentional about the way that you all meet together. So you want to have rules or guidelines around how you interact in meetings, and you want to purposely make efforts to make sure that those that are fully remote aren't excluded from the conversation, and that they're able to participate in the same way as those that are in person are. So the key takeaway here with remote work, prioritize it, but set standards on how you show up together as a team. Next up, we have the accommodation process. So this is a huge one in supporting an inclusive environment at your workplace. First off, you want to make sure that your policy for accommodations is clearly outlined and easily found for your team. It doesn't hurt to share it either, right? A lot of people, hear about it when they first join a company, or they might read it in the handbook. But we just did a couple weeks ago a quick 15-minute presentation with our team to just give them a reminder of what it is, what it's meant for, how to use it, and encourage our team members to ask questions about it. Another thing that we did here that was helpful is we established a budget for home office equipment. So instead of even having to, request additional equipment that people might need at home, we gave them a budget right off the bat when they first joined the company to buy items that they might need. There also can be a lot of hesitancy around people wanting to engage in the accommodation process. So as an organization or as an HR leader, it's really important to understand the requirements outlined by the ADA. And that way you're able to, abide by those standards, but also be able to put people's minds at ease who are feeling a little hesitant about wanting to engage in the process. And just some reminders that are helpful. HR is supposed to manage that process, right? It's not managers. It should be handled separately outside of job responsibilities. Another big one is around storing documentation. So any like medical information that you obtain as a part of the accommodation process should not be stored in personnel files. It should be stored separate. Another thing I mentioned, medical information. One thing that you can do here is instead of focusing on a diagnosis, to focus more on the functional limits that someone is experiencing at work. And so that is, big in helping protect people's medical information and helping them, feel comfortable with the process. And lastly, I mentioned this a little bit, but encourage questions and collaboration, right? The accommodation process is interactive and collaborative for a reason. So if people aren't sure, give them the space to ask questions and to start that conversation. Next step, we have training. So training is super important. Digital accessibility knowledge is mission critical to AudioEye as an organization. And because of that, we have multiple ways that we try and permeate digital accessibility knowledge throughout the organization. So the IAAP, which stands for International Association of Accessibility Professionals, is an amazing organization that we partnered with for the last 10 years or so in various different ways. We're an organizational member of IAAP, but one of the ways that we partner with them is through the CPAC certification. So CPAC stands for Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. So anybody on our team that wants to go through the process of studying and taking the CPAC test, we obviously pay for all of that for them, but then we also pay out a small bonus to them when they pass the test as well. And so it's that knowledge is critical to everything that we do here at AudioEye. So we like to get that to everyone, but I'm sure on your teams, you also may have people working in accessibility, and they can become experts too as well through the CPAC certification process with IAAP. And we also have internal training that we developed that we offer to all of our new hires as well. Our Foundations of Accessibility course. So it's about 8 hours of instruction. That's extremely helpful to people, especially when they're coming from varying degrees of understanding of digital accessibility prior to getting to AudioEye. So it helps them really understand, the gravity of the problem that we aim to fix and how we can approach it empathetically and knowledgeably. So the key takeaway here with training is that knowledge is power. Train your entire team on accessibility. And then next step, we have meetings. As I mentioned, the majority of our team is fully remote. So meeting platforms is, the number one way that we all get to interact with one another. So it's really important for us to have accessible meetings. And Mariella did a fantastic job at the beginning of this webinar talking through some of the different things that you can make your meetings more accessible by doing. But some of the things that we do here are using closed captioning during a meeting. That's a setting on Zoom or on Google Meets that you just turn it on. You don't have to turn it on every time, so that's helpful. Sharing slides before or after meetings so that people with disabilities can get more familiar with the content. Being really thorough in explaining slide content, right, and providing all of the context necessary, as well as using alt text and audio descriptions like the ones that Mariella and I used at the beginning of this presentation. So key takeaways here for meetings are know and share accessibility best practices with your team and hold each other accountable. All right, next up we have tooling. Tooling powers remote tech companies like AudioEye. Tech companies love fancy tools. I've evaluated probably 50 or more HR related tools since I've been here in the last 3 years. And I can count on, one hand how many of them were accessible. So most people haven't heard of digital accessibility when it's brought up on those calls, which is why AudioEye is here serving the mission that we are. But companies might say or think that their platform is accessible, but we've gotten in the habit of just testing it up front. So we found that testing is really helpful in understanding just how accessible or inaccessible something is. Another thing that you can do is request a VPAT. So that stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And that is a document that outlines how technology adheres to its accessibility guidelines. So creating VPATs is also something that AudioEye does for our customers here as well. We've had to go to some pretty great lengths to have specific tools be accessible, but by no means are we perfect. So we have tools that we still need to improve. And for those tools, we have workarounds. But a workaround just really isn't sufficient enough. We should be able to offer the same employee experience to everyone without having to adjust or have a workaround. So that is our goal. And as we get the opportunity to make changes, we definitely take advantage of that. So the key takeaway here with tooling is accessibility tooling empowers everybody to be accessible. So everybody needs to be able to use it in the same way. So those are some of the things that we have learned throughout the employment lifecycle that we feel have made our environment more inclusive. I like to bring this back to the idea of digital accessibility being a journey. So it's important to have a growth mindset as you're on that journey. We are not perfect, and we, like you all, will run into challenges because the internet is inherently inaccessible. But it's important to, like I said, have that growth mindset and to create the feedback loops necessary that allow you to make that impactful incremental change along the way. And again, I just want to give one last thank you to our team of allies and experts who might be on this call here at AudioEye, who have given feedback over the years and have continually worked with me to help make AudioEye a better, more inclusive workplace for everybody. And I think that leads us into Q&A.
That is correct. Brittany, hearing you talk during the presentation today has inspired me. Like, this organization is doing so many incredible and innovative things to really live out its values of centering and on accessibility. And I am so happy to do this work alongside you and to know that there are so many allies and experts within this organization to make sure that the accessibility that we are trying to create in the world that outside is being reflected right here internally in our policies, in our process. I do have one quick question for you, and then I would love to open it up to our community members. So while you think of your amazing questions for Brittany, I'll have a first question for you. So as we look ahead to 2024, what trends or developments do you anticipate, and how can organizations prepare to stay ahead of the curve?
Yes, that is a fabulous question. So as far as digital accessibility trends that I see happening in 2024 and what organizations can do to be prepared, I feel like more than ever, the need and awareness for digital accessibility is greater. And I think we'll see that into 2024 and beyond. So on the regulatory front, there are new bills being proposed in different jurisdictions everywhere. So the DOJ is proposing regulations for website accessibility for state and local governments under Title II of the ADA. California is also considering a bill which would amend their current Civil Rights Act to require website accessibility. So awareness is increasing, and at that same time, remote and hybrid work isn't going away either. So I feel like now is it's more imperative than ever for companies to be compliant, right? Only 3% of the internet is digitally accessible, which is why AudioEye exists. It's why we have the mission that we do. So there's no better time to ensure that your website and digital content is accessible for your customers, but that it's also accessible internally and your tools are accessible for your team. So to answer your question, I think we're going to see continued awareness and a continued need for adoption. And that's definitely something that companies can do to get ahead. And I think the first step is just auditing where you're at, right? Taking a look at your tooling, taking a look at your internal practices and seeing whether or not they're inclusive. And then once you have that snapshot, from there you can put together a plan of what it takes to really be inclusive and to take your organization to the next level.
Love that. I would love to open up the stage for others that may have questions for Brittani. So here we go. We've got our first question. How can you validate the accessibility of your trainings, such as your videos?
Yeah, that's a good question. How can you validate the accessibility of your trainings? So I think going and videos. So I think going through those tips that we had mentioned, making sure that you have closed captioning on. So if you're recording live videos, making sure that that closed captioning is on. Also having a transcript of that training is helpful. As well as having the slides available or having that content in written form too. I think the key theme there is having different ways for that information to be digested in whatever presentation or content you put together, that you're making sure that you're adhering to those accessibility standards so that everybody can access it.
Love that. I actually have a really great question, and this is from Lisa Catino. They say, I love that you are including accessibility training with new hires. Can you estimate how much this is costing or saving the organization? Ooh, it's a spicy one. I like it.
Off the top of my head, I know the training through IAAP, I want to say, is about $500 per person. I know if you have a membership, though, you do with IAAP, you can also get several free test spots a year. So by having that membership, that can reduce the cost. It is, I feel like it's really hard to quantify the savings because that information, especially for AudioEye, is so important to everything that we do. And so by having more people have that information across our organization, we are doing things right the first time. We're fully understanding problems. We aren't having to go to a handful of people that have that knowledge, right? Everybody has it. So it's helping us better understand the problem that we're aiming to solve. It's better helping us understand our end users and their needs. So I feel like the savings here for AudioEye is pretty exponential. But I don't think I can put an actual number on it, but for us it's mission critical to us being able to do our jobs effectively and to serve the community and serve our customers.
I love that answer, because I think that one of the most critical things that we're really doing here is providing that awareness and that training and that exposure, because the reality is that so many people don't have that exposure. So being able to provide that foundational base for all of our employees, it should be something that every single company should be doing. And the fact that this is just something that we offer to our new employees is really, really incredible.
We do have quite a few people go through the IAAP certification process, but that was also one of the reasons why we developed an internal training as well. That maybe isn't as long as far as instruction, but it's about 8 hours of content that we train every quarter or so. And so that was a way, I guess, to reduce the cost of having to to pay another organization for that. Because really, like Mariella said, it's the knowledge that is most important, that everybody has that same understanding. So there are ways to reduce the cost as long as you're getting that critical information out there.
I love that. Brittani, This was insightful. You've taken us off and kicked us off like a really great cup of coffee in the morning. And thank you so much for that. I don't have any additional questions for you, but I do want to be very mindful of time. So what I am going to do next is I am going to bring our next guest up on the stage. Brittani, thank you so much for all of your time and expertise sharing today. Until next time, and I look forward to having you in a lot more webinars in the future. Alrighty. So next, what we are going to do is we are going to bring up on the stage Bossad and April. Let's actually go ahead and get started. So welcome, Boss and April. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing well.
Well, thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous. Before we get started and we go straight into our panel questions, I'd love to have you guys introduce yourselves. So your name, role, location, audio description, preferred gender pronoun, and if you feel comfortable, disclosing your disability. Boss, I'd love to start with you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bazad, or Baz for short, and my preferred gender pronouns are he, his, and him. As far as an audio description, I am a brown-eyed, black-haired individual with olive skin, standing about 5'9", and my role encompasses two companies. I work for Vanward Consulting, which is a company based in Michigan, the state in which I live. And I'm also an accessibility tester for AudioEye, having done it for a couple of years and enjoyed it through and through. My disability? Well, I was born with Leber's congenital amaurosis, which is a relatively fancy way of simply saying I see light and nothing else. But Leber's varies considerably given the people who have it. And I say this because at work we have a refrain at Vanward which says, blindness is a spectrum. So just as visual impairment is a spectrum, so too is Leber's and everything else. Everything I do, everything I mentioned is remote. And so I'm thrilled to be here because that has been part of the conversation, and I'm, needless to say, very excited to continue that conversation.
April, the stage is yours.
I'm April. I come to you from Indiana. I am a blue-eyed, brown-haired woman who stands about 5'4". And I have a green shirt that has like the bow tie collar in the front. My employment kind of is a little bit of a wide variety. I've done some paralegal work, a little bit of medical transcription. I was a caregiver for a time, and now I do accessibility testing for AudioEye.
Fantastic. So let's go ahead into our panel questions for today. I really enjoyed some of our conversations over the last few days and just learning from both of you. And so let's go ahead and kick us off with the first question. What diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that focus on disability allowed you to be successful in your career? Boz, let's start with you on this question.
Well, there are two, for me, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives which helped shape my success in and outside of the work environment. To start, I utilize assistive technology on a day-to-day basis to get my work done. From JAWS for Windows on a laptop to an iPhone running VoiceOver. Now, for those who are not familiar, JAWS and VoiceOver are both screen reading software applications. VoiceOver reads information aloud to users who are blind and visually impaired, as does JAWS. And I mention these for one primary reason, which dives headlong into the second initiative, web accessibility. Both of those screen readers have enabled me and continue to enable me to browse around the web, searching independently on Google, shopping on Amazon. I had been able to successfully buy spare cushions for a headset that I need to use at work, communicate with my sighted counterparts on Slack, and use web apps like Microsoft Word and Google Docs. I say this because there is a definitive need for accessibility testing. As you heard Brittany point out, the internet is only 3% accessible. The reality is this. In the 1990s, the word internet was a simple luxury for a lot of people. Nowadays, it's an expense, sure, but an expense that provides the means to pay for other expenses. This is particularly true for those of us who work remotely. So I urge people, developers and companies, and even folks, I say people because there are freelancers out there, to seriously consider implementing accessibility in your design. Because what then will happen is you'll be catering to a population, and a population that needs accessibility on a day-to-day basis. So, in saying all of that, if you do this, I can tell you without a doubt that you'll be on your way to approaching true inclusivity, because the internet's not going away anytime soon.
Oh, boss, I feel like I can hear you all day long talking about this. Like, we're going to have to do just like a webinar with you in April just to talk about this for hours. Um, April, I know you two have lots to say about this. You've had an incredible career working in the field of law, and you also have an experience that is very different from Boz in terms of how it started. I would love to have you share that with our listeners today. The stage is yours, ma'am.
Well, Buzz touched on how internet used to be free for everybody. Well, there were blind people in the late 90s, early 2000s, such as myself, who were trying to become gainfully employed. And it was a lot more difficult because we didn't have all of these nice, easy, accessible software luxuries that we do have today. We had to pound the pavement a lot more. We had to search. We had to work with possible job coaches and things like that to find a happy medium so that we could work and become gainfully employed. Because at the end of the day, that's all we want to do is become gainfully employed, just like everybody else. And the accessibility is of the utmost importance. There were times when I was trying to establish myself as a reputable paralegal that I didn't know if it was going to work because, well, my screen reader didn't work with this software, or my screen reader didn't work with that software, or I didn't have transportation. It is a little easier now, and I really had to fight back then. But we've still got a long way to go, and that is why I am glad I found AudioEye, because they are really good at putting the people with the disabilities to work to help things run more smoothly for the companies who need the accessibility assistance.
I love hearing that. And I think that this has been one of the most accessible, if not the most accessible organization that I've had the pleasure of working with. And I think you touched on that, April, at the very end there, in that we really are working here at AudioEye with allies, with people that really want to be able to create those spaces to create an accessible organization from the inside. And that is so important and unique about the work that we do here. Let's go into our second question for today. In your opinion, what role does leadership play in driving inclusivity, and how can senior leaders become more effective advocates for diversity and inclusion in support of disability? April, I'd love to hear what you have to say to this question.
I think leadership can work more towards diversity and inclusivity with accessibility by going with a little roadmap. First of all, educating themselves. And if they have an interest in possibly hiring visually impaired or blind individuals, they can reach out to state departments, vocational rehabilitation. This is a department that does a lot of work in helping people gain employment. And then there's the key point, I feel, is making sure that the party you're working with actually works with the people that have these disabilities, because learning from the person with the disability on what they need is key. Rather than find somebody to tell you what this person needs, work with the person. How can I help you? And then how can you help me if I help you? It is all about teamwork and setting up a good rapport.
I love that. It's critical to be able to work with the community, not for the community, in building these technologies, in building these policies, in creating these spaces with the community. We are able to really get rid of all these things like savior complex and bias, and actually learn from the real experts. Boss, I know you've got a lot to say on this question as well. So go ahead. The microphone is yours, sir.
Well, April articulated it quite well, so I'll add just a few points. So leadership, education is a factor that should play a role in inclusivity. It's pivotal. But I would also say that education, as far as inclusion, diversity, and equity, should encompass everyone, not just leadership. So it's important to keep abreast of these things. And I'm going to give you guys a few examples of how easy it is to find this kind of content. As an experiment, I went to YouTube and LinkedIn respectively, because I know that there's a wealth of information out there. And in particular, on YouTube, I typed in the following: inclusion in the workplace. And this is what I got. Immediately, there were two results from TEDx talks, in particular, one from a Katarina Rivera, who did a phenomenal job. I recommend that presentation. It's relatively short, but she succinctly compacts many of the points driven in this webinar that revolve around accessibility and inclusion, and specifically how important it is for accessibility to start from the ground up. It shouldn't be a secondary thing. It should always be among the primary components that you're considering when it comes to design. And I wanted to also add that AI, which is a huge buzzword in 2023, is great. And while it has wonderful applications, there is a need, an unequivocal need, to put humans at the forefront, not just AI. And that's something that AudioEye is doing, and I find that pretty awesome, to be honest with you. So when you go to LinkedIn then and you type in the same kinds of keywords, you find a couple of groups immediately: accessibility and inclusion, the digital business and learning culture, which has about 50 members last I checked. And then there's another one: inclusion, diversity, belonging, and empowerment. This is tailored for those in the tech and HR industry, and it tackles a myriad of topics. Why am I saying this? Because it's relatively simple to find content. But more important than that, you should also be engaging with that content. Don't passively read, don't passively listen, actively engage. How do you do that? By talking to those involved. In fact, that last group I mentioned is specifically tailored for networking opportunities. Ask us questions, and by us, I'm referring to the disability community. Don't hesitate, because sometimes that's what tends to happen. Believe me, in a lot of cases, you're going to find success in your results, because we understand the far-reaching implications of what you want to do. You want to make a more inclusive environment. We're all about that, right? That's why this webinar is existing today. So in summary, I know I've said a lot, and I said I wouldn't, but I'm very passionate about this topic. Educate yourself, as April pointed out, and don't hesitate to engage with those communities and ask questions. That's how you truly get a conversation started.
I love that. Thank you so much for that, Boz. I'm going to wrap up with one final question, and then we're going to open it up to the community to ask questions. So I'd love for you to just give me a quick summary on this last one. As we look to the future, as we approach 2024, what are the most pressing challenges facing organizations in fostering a more inclusive workplace? Boz, I'd love for you to just give me a quick answer to that.
Sure. So in my view, the most pressing challenge facing an organization that's trying to foster inclusion in the workplace is the fact that there needs to be some level of maintenance when it comes to updating apps. And that's why I said before that accessibility should be from the ground up. That was a very poignant remark that Mr. Rivera had made. And I say this because too often we encounter, whether it's on an iPhone or a computer, some piece of software application that's working beautifully and smoothly, flawlessly, and then all of a sudden it breaks. So this is why it's really important to not only keep accessibility at the forefront, but like I said before, engaging with the community, because the more you do that, the fewer problems you're going to have. And I think that's very important to continue to do.
Thank you, Boz. That was beautiful. And then April, go ahead and close us up. What are the most pressing challenges facing organizations in fostering a more inclusive workplace?
Well, I feel that there are two big points that need more addressing in 2024 to have a more inclusive workplace. Number one is advocacy, because people need to not only know what people need, but they need to know why. And the main thing they need to understand is not everyone has the same liberty and freedom to jump in the car and go across town to pick up your groceries. Not everyone has the liberty to be able to always depend on someone else. So it is imperative that these apps and websites work for us. For a quick example, small chain local grocer in my area, I can't shop at their site. So I went and talked to them. I said, look, this is how this big popular site works. I believe it might have even been Walmart. Listen to my voiceover. So I start flicking through everything. And I'm okay, now this is what yours is like. And I'm just getting different things like image. And I don't know what it is. I said, no, see, yours needs to sound like theirs. So that is my form of advocacy. I advocated, I showed them what I needed and why. And I think that's all important, because we're still under the 50% employed rate for the visually impaired community. And I hope to see that come up in 2024. And I believe that companies like AudioEye on their journey can help make that happen. And I'm very proud to be part of this movement, and I cannot wait to see the changes that are yet to come.
April, it feels like we're a part of a revolution, and we are kind of leading this and just really driving this change, as you said, to really change that number of only 3% of the internet being accessible. It's unacceptable that this is happening. And so being able to have that advocacy and being able to change things is how I see that happening in the future. And it's so thrilling to be able to be a part of the community and the organization that is really doing that work. All right, I am going to open up some questions for the community. So if you are listening in to today's webinar and you have questions either for Boz or April or Boz and April, this is your opportunity to go into the Q&A and submit your questions. Boz and April, this was so insightful. I've been incredibly privileged and honored to get to have these conversations with each of you, and to now be able to share that knowledge and expertise with the community is so exciting for me. I feel absolutely inspired just hearing you both talk, and just feel the commitment that you both have to this work. I'm honored to be able to work with you to do this. So we get a question from Ted. I think it's more of a comment from Ted. It says, accessibility to sites will broaden a firm's customer base and thus increase revenue. And that's so true. That really goes back, April, to what you just said. Making your website accessible allows your website to have access to an entire new community. I'm going to go right ahead into my question, and then we're going to wrap up. What are you most interested about in the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in 2024? If you could just give me a quick answer to that, and then we're going to wrap up today's webinar. April, I'd love to start with you.
I am most interested about advocating for better healthcare information at our fingertips, because it is the most imperative, and it's something that we could hold some types of remote jobs in, and that we could use for ourselves or our loved ones.
100% love that. Boz, what about you? What are you most interested about in diversity, equity initiatives in 2024?
So there are two for me about diversity, equity initiatives in 2024. One, the refinement of artificial intelligence, because as I mentioned before, it has some excellent applications, but it's not yet able to be as autonomous as autonomous. And honestly, that's okay, because I think that humans and AI should work in concert, because it's important, especially again within the accessibility realm. So AI, however, still has some very awesome applications in terms of describing content. There is already an application out there that does this, actually a couple, and they do a phenomenal job. So I'm excited to see how that's going to be leveraged in the future. And then on a larger scale, it's really just the awareness that people are starting to have. And I dare say it's going to be increasing as we move forward, not just in 2024, but in the future. The awareness that people have regarding accessibility and inclusion. And I'm very, very excited to see where that's going, because we are seeing increasingly more accessible software, more conversations surrounding these topics, be it on LinkedIn, YouTube, or other platforms. So I'm really just excited to continue to see that grow.
Thank you so much, Boz. April, this was incredibly insightful. Unfortunately, we do have to bounce off. Thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. If you want to stay in the know on future events, make sure that you're following us on LinkedIn. You can follow us and connect with us by going to LinkedIn.com/company/AudioEye -inc. In there, you will stay in the know on future events, blog posts, webinars that we are hosting, and just stay in the know on all things web accessibility. I am your host, Mariela Paulino, and I will see you next time. I hope you will continue making the web more accessible and removing barriers to digital access. Bye.